He thought he was falling in love until one kiss revealed she was never just a girl. Some secrets hide in plain sight. Some are buried beneath silk, silence, and survival, but some are tattooed into skin. By the end of this story, you will understand why the most dangerous people in the world are not the ones who carry weapons but the ones who carry secrets they were born into. The coffee shop on Mercer Street was the kind of place that smelled like second chances. It was tucked between a dry cleaner and a bookstore that nobody visited anymore, and it had exactly 11 tables, mismatched chairs, and a chalkboard menu that the owner, an old Greek man named Stavros, updated only when the mood struck him. People came here not because the coffee was extraordinary, though it was, but because the place had a way of making strangers feel like they belonged. That was where Daniel Holt first saw her. He was 31, a freelance architect with a drafting tablet, a half-eaten croissant, and the particular exhaustion of a man who had been working 16-hour days for 3 weeks straight. He had no intention of looking up from his screen. He had a deadline. He had responsibilities. He had absolutely no room in his life for distraction. Then she walked in. She was not the kind of beautiful that announced itself. She did not command attention the way some women do, with noise, with color, with performance. She was quite beautiful, the kind that snuck up on a person, dark hair pulled loosely over one shoulder, a gray coat slightly too large for her frame, eyes that moved across the room the way eyes do when someone has been trained from a very young age to always locate the exits. She ordered a black coffee. No sugar. No small talk. She sat 2 tables away from Daniel, opened a worn paperback Dostoevsky. He noticed and disappeared into it. He told himself he was not staring. He was observing, architecturally. Her name, he would later learn, was Sorrel Voss. But that afternoon, she was simply the woman who looked up from her book exactly once, caught him watching, and instead of looking away held his gaze for 3 full seconds before returning to her page. 3 seconds. He counted. By the time his coffee went cold, he had already decided he would come back tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that. It took him 11 days to say hello, and when he finally did, standing awkwardly beside her table with his tablet under his arm and absolutely nothing intelligent prepared, she looked up at him with those careful eyes and said, simply, "You're the man who counts." He blinked. "Excuse me, you counted. When I looked at you, I could see your lips moving." A pause. 3 seconds. He should have been embarrassed. Instead, he laughed, the first real laugh he'd had in months. She smiled. Small. Controlled. Like someone who had learned to ration joy carefully. He didn't know it yet. He couldn't have known. But that smile had a price tag that neither of them could see. They met at the coffee shop every morning for 3 weeks after that. It was never planned. That was the thing Daniel kept telling himself. It was organic, accidental, the kind of connection that city life occasionally manufactures between 2 lonely people and a good espresso machine. He would arrive at 8. She would arrive at 8:15. Stavros would pretend not to notice the way the architect suddenly started combing his hair before leaving the house. Sorrel Voss was 28 years old, and she spoke 4 languages that Daniel knew of and possibly more that he didn't. She was a translator for a private firm. She said, corporate documents, legal contracts, nothing interesting. She delivered this information the way someone recites a rehearsed answer, smooth and quick, leaving no room for follow-up questions. Daniel, who had spent his career reading spaces, understanding what a room revealed about the people inside it, noticed this. He filed it away quietly and said nothing. What he focused on instead was everything else. The way she laughed at dry humor but never at cruelty. The way she tore the corner of her napkin into tiny, precise squares when she was thinking. The way she always sat with her back to the wall and her eyes toward the door, a habit so deeply embedded in her body that she seemed entirely unaware of it. He asked her once, casually, if she grew up in the city. She looked at her coffee cup for a moment too long before answering. "I grew up in several places," she said. "We moved a lot." "Military family?" he guessed. "Something like that." That was the thing about Sorrel. Every answer she gave was technically true. He would realize this later, that she never lied to him outright. She simply handed him puzzle pieces with no picture on the box. On the last Friday of that third week, it rained so hard that the streets turned to rivers and neither of them had an umbrella. They waited together under the narrow awning outside the coffee shop, shoulders almost touching, watching the city drown around them. "Tell me something true," Daniel said. He wasn't sure why. The rain made him bold. She turned to look at him. Something shifted behind her eyes, a door opening half an inch, then catching on its chain. "I'm trying to disappear," she said quietly, not in a sad way. "Just I want a small life. A quiet one. I want to be nobody for a while." He nodded slowly. "Is it working?" She looked at him the way a person looks at something they know they shouldn't want. "It was," she said. That night, he asked if she wanted to have dinner. A real one. Not coffee. Not croissants. Not the comfortable ambiguity of accidental morning meetings. She was quiet for so long that he started to retract the question. Then yes, one word. But the way she said it sounded less like excitement and more like a decision that could not be unmade. Across the street, half hidden beneath a black umbrella, a man in a charcoal suit watched them with the stillness of someone paid to be invisible. He took out his phone, typed 3 words, and walked away. The restaurant Daniel chose was small, warm, and deliberately unimpressive. He had considered somewhere fancier, somewhere with candles engineered for romance and menus without prices, but something about Sorrel told him that grandeur would make her retreat, so he picked a corner Italian place on a quiet street with checkered tablecloths and a waiter named Enzo who called everyone my friend. She arrived exactly on time. Gray dress this time. Hair down. And something different in her posture, a deliberate loosening, like a soldier who had given themselves permission for one evening to stand down. The first hour was effortless. They talked about architecture and language, about the way both disciplines were really just systems for helping people understand each other. They argued gently about Dostoevsky. She ordered wine she barely touched. He ordered pasta he barely tasted. Neither of them noticed Enzo refilling the breadbasket 3 times. Then her phone buzzed. It was face down on the table. She had placed it there when she sat deliberately face down. Daniel now realized, not casually. She glanced at it without picking it up. Something crossed her face. Fast, gone in under a second. But he caught it. Fear. Clean and practiced and immediately suppressed. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Fine," she said. "Work." She turned the phone over. The screen was dark. She slid it into her bag, but her fingers, when they returned to the table, were no longer still. She began tearing the corner of her napkin. Tiny, precise squares. "Sorrel." She looked up. "You don't have to perform fine with me," he said quietly. "I'm not asking for your whole story. I notice things. It's a design problem, honestly. I can't turn it off." She studied him for a long moment. Then something in her expression softened, not completely, not recklessly, but enough. "There are people," she said carefully, "who would prefer I not have dinners like this, in places like this, with people like you." "What kind of people?" "The kind," she said, "who believe that where you come from is where you belong. Forever." He leaned forward slightly. "And where do you come from?" She smiled, but it was the rationed kind, the careful kind. "Somewhere I left," she said, "a long time ago." He wanted to push, every instinct in him the same instinct that read a floor plan and found the flaw in 30 seconds, wanted to ask the next question, and the one after that, until the whole structure revealed itself. But he didn't. He reached across the table instead and covered her restless fingers with his hand. She went very still, not frightened, still. Something else. The stillness of a person who had not been touched gently in a long time and had forgotten what it felt like. "Then you don't have to go back," he said simply. Her eyes dropped to his hand over hers. She didn't pull away. But outside the restaurant window, a black car sat idling at the curb. It had been there since she arrived, and as Daniel signaled for the check, the car's engine turned over slow, patient, and eased into the dark like a shadow that had learned to move on its own. 3 weeks after that dinner, Daniel Holt was in love. He did not announce this. He was not the kind of man who made declarations before he was certain. And he was an architect's certainty was load-bearing, but it was there, solid and undeniable, in the way he saved the window seat at the coffee shop without being asked, in the way he started reading Dostoevsky so he could argue with her properly, in the way his apartment, which had always felt like a workspace he occasionally slept in, had started to feel like somewhere he wanted to bring her. They had fallen into a rhythm that felt both new and ancient, the particular comfort of two people who have decided, without saying it aloud, that they have chosen each other. She came to his apartment on a Tuesday. No occasion. She brought wine and he cooked badly, and they sat on the floor of his living room surrounded by architectural blueprints he'd been too distracted to file, and she laughed at the chaos of it. A real laugh this time, unrationed, unguarded, and he thought, there she is. That's who she actually is. Later, they sat close on the couch, her head tilted toward his shoulder, the city murmuring outside the window. He turned to say something ordinary, something about the blueprints, about the building he was designing, and instead he pressed his lips softly to the curve of her neck. He felt her breath catch, and then he felt something else. Beneath his lips, just below the hairline raised skin. A scar, or so he thought at first, but as he pulled back slightly and looked, the low lamplight revealed something far more deliberate. A mark, small, precise, inked rather than scarred. A symbol he did not immediately recognize, a thin angular crest, no larger than a coin, the lines too clean and intentional to be decorative. He looked at it for exactly 2 seconds. Sorrel sat up, not frantically but with the swift, fluid movement of someone whose body had already decided before her mind caught up. Her hand moved to her neck. Her hair fell forward, covering it. The room shifted. Sorrel, it's nothing, she said. Her voice was steady, professionally steady. The voice she used when she was building a wall in real time. That didn't look like nothing. She stood, reached for her coat with hands that were for the first time since he'd known her not quite controlled. I should go, she said. Hey. He stood too, stepping gently in front of her, not blocking, just present. Talk to me. She looked at him, and for one long, unguarded moment, the careful architecture of her composure cracked just enough for him to see what was underneath. Not sadness, not guilt, terror. Daniel, she said quietly, there are things about me that if you knew them you would not be standing this close. Try me, he said. She shook her head, pulled her coat around her shoulders. Not tonight, she whispered. Please, not tonight. She left, and he stood in his apartment staring at the closed door, the blueprint-covered floor, the 2 wine glasses still sitting side by side on the coffee table. His phone buzzed. A known number. He answered. Silence. Then a man's voice, low, accented, unhurried, said 4 words. Step away from her. The line went dead. Daniel did not step away. He told himself it was stubbornness, the particular brand of quiet defiance that had carried him through a difficult childhood, a collapsed business, and 3 years of rebuilding everything from scratch. He was not a man who responded well to instructions delivered by anonymous voices in the dark. But the truth he sat with for 2 sleepless nights after that phone call was simpler and more frightening than stubbornness. He could not step away from Sorrel Voss because he was already too far in, and somewhere beneath the fear, beneath the rational voice in his head cataloging every red flag he had chosen to footnote rather than read, he knew that she was too. On the 3rd morning, she came to the coffee shop. She looked like someone who had not slept either. She sat across from him without ordering anything, folded her hands on the table, and looked at him with eyes that had made a decision overnight. I'm going to tell you something, she said, and when I'm finished, you are going to have a choice. I need you to understand that both options are valid. I will not be hurt if you choose the door. He said nothing. He waited. She took one measured breath. My name is not Sorrel Voss. The coffee shop moved around them, Stavros grinding beans, a couple arguing softly near the window, the city pressing its noise against the glass, and none of it touched them. My real name, she continued, is Sorrel Vassin, and my father is Gregor Vassin. The name landed like something dropped from a height. Daniel knew that name. Everyone knew that name, not from news reports, which were always carefully thin on detail, but from the particular cultural osmosis that surrounds power when it operates just below the surface of the visible world. Gregor Vasson, shipping empires and steel contracts as the public face, and beneath that face an organization that had operated across 6 countries for 40 years without a single successful prosecution. "You're his daughter," Daniel said, not a question. "His only daughter," she said, "which in his world means I am not a person. I am a transaction waiting to happen, an alliance, a seal on a contract between families." She pulled her hair aside, exposed the mark on her neck in the lamplight of the coffee shop morning. "Every Vasson heir is marked at birth," she said quietly. "It is their way of saying you belong to us. You cannot leave. You cannot hide. Because wherever you go, whoever finds you, they will know exactly what you are and exactly who you belong to." Daniel stared at the mark, at the clean angular crest he now understood was not decorative. It was a brand, dressed in ink instead of iron, but a brand all the same. "I left 4 years ago," Sorrel said. "I built a new name, a new life. A small, quiet, nobody life." Her voice caught barely, just a thread of it, and then I walked into a coffee shop on Mercer Street and a man with a drafting tablet started counting seconds. The silence between them stretched. "The phone call," Daniel said slowly. "The man outside the restaurant. The car. They've been watching me for weeks," she said. "They found me. They always find me." She looked at her hands. "But they haven't moved yet. Which means my father wants something first." "What does he want?" She looked up, and in her eyes was the specific exhaustion of someone who has been running so long they have forgotten what standing still felt like. "He wants me to come home," she said, "and he wants to use you to make sure I do." The walk back to his apartment was silent. Not the comfortable silence they had built over weeks of mornings and wine and blueprints on the floor. This was the silence of 2 people carrying something too heavy to speak around, moving through it carefully, the way you move through a room after something irreplaceable has broken. Daniel made coffee he didn't drink. Sorrel sat at his kitchen table with her coat still on, like someone who hadn't fully decided whether to stay. He stood at the window for a long time, watching the street below, looking, he realized, for black cars. "How long have you known they were watching you?" he finally asked. "Since the 3rd morning," she said, "at the coffee shop. There was a man at the corner table, different face every few days. Same posture. Same eyes. He turned. And you kept coming back." It wasn't an accusation, but she heard the weight in it. "Yes," she said simply. "Sorrel, if you knew they were watching, if you knew what coming back meant, why didn't you just..." He stopped, pressed his hand against the back of his neck. "Why didn't you disappear again?" She looked at the table, at the coffee mug in front of her that she hadn't touched. "Because I was tired," she said. "Because for 11 days a man sat 2 tables away and counted seconds and didn't want anything from me. Didn't know my name or my father or what my blood is worth to certain people." Her voice was quiet, but it carried. "Because you were the first person in 4 years who made me feel like a human being instead of a liability." The honesty of it hit him somewhere deep and structural. He sat down across from her. "What does your father actually want? The real version?" She was quiet for a moment. "Then there is a man, Dmitry Lesh. He runs an organization out of Vienna smaller than my father's but growing. For 2 years they have been circling each other, territory, contracts. The kind of negotiation that does not happen in boardrooms." She paused. "Dmitry has a son, 26. My father wants to close the distance between their 2 families permanently." "He wants to marry you off," Daniel said flatly. "He wants to merge 2 empires," she said. "I am the paperwork." The word landed like a fist. Daniel stood again. He couldn't sit still with it. He moved to the window, came back, stood at the edge of the table. "And if you refuse?" She looked at him then fully, without the careful management she usually applied to her expressions, and what he saw in her face answered the question more completely than any words could. "What about me?" he asked quietly. "You said he wants to use me." "You are leverage," she said. "In my father's world, the fastest way to move someone is to threaten what they love." The word hung between them. Love. Neither of them had said it before. Not like this. He'll come after you, she continued. Not to hurt you, not yet. First he'll make you offer something you can't refuse on paper. And if that doesn't move me, she stopped. Sorrel, you should let me go, she whispered. The version of this where you stay, it doesn't end well for you. I've seen how my father removes obstacles. I've watched it my whole life. Daniel looked at her for a long time, at the woman who had walked into a coffee shop trying to be nobody, who had counted seconds back at him, who tore napkins into precise squares when she was afraid and laughed like someone rationing sunlight. I'm not an obstacle, he said quietly. And I'm not leaving. She closed her eyes, and a single tear moved down her face, not dramatic, not collapse, just one honest tear from a woman who had held everything together for so long that one small act of loyalty had cracked something open. Outside, a black car turned slowly onto his street. And this time, it stopped. The knock at the door came at exactly 9 in the morning. 3 knocks. Measured, patient. The knock of someone who has never needed to knock twice in their life. Daniel looked at Sorrel. She had gone completely still, not the stillness of fear this time, but something older and more complicated, the stillness of a person who has spent a lifetime preparing for a moment and is now watching it arrive. Don't open it, she said quietly. If I don't, Daniel said, what happens? She said nothing, which was its own answer. He opened the door. The man standing in the hallway was not what Daniel had expected. He had constructed, somewhere in the architecture of his imagination, a figure of obvious menace, broad, dark-suited, the visual grammar of threat. Instead, he found a man of about 60, lean and elegantly dressed, with silver hair swept back from a face that was almost distinguished, almost kind. Almost. It was the eyes that corrected the impression. They were the eyes of a man who had made decisions, large, irrevocable, consequence-heavy decisions so many times that the weight of them had become invisible to him, comfortable, even. Mr. Holt, the man said, my name is Gregor Vasson. I apologize for the hour. He did not wait to be invited in. He simply moved unhurried, inevitable, into the apartment the way weather moves into an open room. 2 men materialized from the hallway behind him and positioned themselves near the door without a word. Gregor looked at his daughter. Sorrel, father. 1 word each, an entire history compressed into 2 syllables. Gregor settled into the chair across the coffee table as though he had been there before. He looked around the apartment at the blueprints, the 2 coffee cups, the life Daniel had built in this space with the mild, appraising eye of a man calculating value. You have a good eye, he said to Daniel, nodding at a framed architectural sketch on the wall, understated, confident. He paused. I respect that. What do you want? Daniel said. Gregor smiled. It was a practiced smile, warm on the surface, load-bearing underneath. I want my daughter to come home, he said. That is all I have ever wanted. He glanced at Sorrel, who had not moved from the kitchen table. I also want to make you an offer, Mr. Holt, a generous one. A contract legitimate. Above board for the redesign of our corporate headquarters in Geneva. 18 months of work. The kind of commission that builds careers. And in exchange, Daniel said slowly, I walk away from your daughter. In exchange, Gregor said, you return to your life. Intact. Prosperous. The final word carried the particular weight of a word with an unspoken opposite. The room was very quiet. Then Sorrel stood. She walked around the table and positioned herself beside Daniel, not behind him, not seeking shelter beside him, shoulder to shoulder, facing her father. I'm not going back, she said. Gregor looked at her with the expression of a man who has heard this before and has long since stopped being moved by it. Sorrel, I'm not finished, she said. Her voice was different now. Stripped of the careful softness she wore in the coffee shop, in the restaurant, in the quiet spaces she had built for herself, this was another voice, entirely older, harder, forged in rooms Daniel had never seen. You want to talk about leverage, father? About what moves people? She reached into the inside pocket of her coat. She placed a small silver drive on the coffee table between them. Gregor's eyes dropped to it, and for the first time since he had walked through the door, something moved behind those careful, cost accounting eyes. Something that looked very much like alarm. 4 years, Sorrel said quietly. I have been gone for years. Did you think I spent that time hiding? She let the silence sit for exactly 3 seconds. Every contract, every name, every transfer across every border for the last decade. All of it. Gregor Vasson looked at his daughter as though seeing her clearly for the first time. You wouldn't, he said. Try me, she said. And Daniel recognized those two words because he had said them to her once, in the same apartment, when she had told him there were things about her he would not be able to stand close to. She had been learning, even then, that she could. The silence that followed lasted exactly 4 seconds. Daniel counted. Old habit. Gregor Vasson did not move. He sat with his hands folded in his lap and his eyes fixed on the silver drive on the coffee table with the expression of a man recalculating, not panicking, never panicking, but quietly dismantling one strategy and assembling another in real time. It was, Daniel thought, the most dangerous kind of stillness he had ever witnessed. Then Gregor looked up at his daughter. You have been busy, he said. 4 years is a long time, Sorrel said. You taught me that patience is the sharpest weapon. I was paying attention. Something moved across Gregor's face. Not quite pride. Not quite fury. Something uncomfortably close to both. He stood slowly, buttoned his jacket. The two men near the door straightened without being told. You understand, he said, that a document is only as powerful as the person holding it, and people, Sorrel people, are fragile things. His eyes moved to Daniel as he said it. Daniel held the look without flinching. He had spent 31 years being underestimated by men who wore their authority like a second skin, contractors who talked over him, investors who dismissed his youth, clients who questioned his instincts. He knew this particular species of intimidation, the kind delivered quietly, inexpensive clothes, with a smile still technically present. I want to be clear about something, Daniel said. Gregor tilted his head slightly. A man unaccustomed to being addressed without permission. Whatever is on that drive, Daniel continued, exists in more than one place. Sorrel is not the only person holding it. So whatever calculation you are running right now, whatever fragile people you are thinking about, factor that in. It was a bluff, partial at least. He did not know for certain what else Sorrel had arranged, but he had watched her for months, watched the precision of her, the patience, the way she thought 3 moves ahead of every conversation, and he was willing to bet his career, his apartment, and every blueprint on that floor that she had not walked into this moment unprepared. Gregor looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at Sorrel. Is this true? Sorrel met her father's gaze without blinking. Does it matter? Another silence. Longer this time. Then something extraordinary happened. Gregor Vasson, the man who had run an empire across 6 countries for 40 years, who had never once in Sorrel's memory conceded anything in any room, sat back down, slowly, like a man setting down a very heavy case he had been carrying for a very long time. What do you want? He said. His voice was different. The performance had gone out of it. Sorrel stepped forward. She stood in front of her father and she spoke without anger, without theater, with nothing but the clean directness of someone who has rehearsed this moment 10,000 times in empty apartments and quiet coffee shops and sleepless nights. I want my name, she said. My real one. I want to exist in your world as a person and not a piece. I want the marriage contract with Dmitry Lesh dissolved permanently. I want your word, not a gesture. Not an implication. Your actual word that no one who matters to me will be touched. And the drive? Gregor asked. Stays where it is, she said, as long as your word holds. Gregor was quiet for a very long time. Outside the apartment window, the city moved through its ordinary morning traffic. Voices, the indifferent machinery of a world that did not know what was being decided in this small room above Mercer Street. You are more like me than you know, Gregor said finally. There was something in his voice that might, in another life, have been tenderness. I know, Sorrel said. That is what I have spent for years trying to fix. Gregor looked at Daniel one last time. The appraising look again, but different now. Less calculation. Something closer to the look one architect gives another's work when they recognize the quality of it against their will. He nodded once, slowly. Then he picked up his coat, signaled his man, and walked to the door. He paused with his hand on the frame. "The coffee shop on Mercer Street," he said, without turning around. "Stavros makes a good espresso. I know because I have been having it sent to my office for 3 years." He left. The door closed, and Daniel and Sorrel stood in the silence of his blueprint-covered apartment, the silver drive still on the coffee table between them, the city still moving outside, and the particular breathless stillness of two people who have just walked through fire and arrived, somehow, on the other side. 3 months later, the coffee shop on Mercer Street got new chairs. Stavros replaced them without announcement or explanation, simply arrived one morning and swapped the mismatched collection for something slightly less mismatched, and when Daniel asked about it, the old Greek man shrugged and said only that some things deserved to be a little more comfortable. Daniel suspected Sorrel had something to do with it. She denied this with the particular straight face she deployed when she was absolutely guilty. Life had not become simple. He had never expected it to. Simple was not a thing either of them was built for him, with his obsessive eye for structural flaws, her with the for languages and the careful past and the habit of sitting with her back to the wall. Simple was not their architecture, but it had become real. Fully, weightily, undeniably real in a way that the preceding months, beautiful as they had been, could not quite claim, because beauty built on concealment is a load-bearing wall with a crack in it, and they both knew now, from either side of that crack, what it felt like to have the whole structure hold anyway. The marriage contract with Dmitry Lesh had been dissolved within 2 weeks of Gregor's visit. No public announcement. No explanation offered. Simply gone. The way things disappear when the person removing them has sufficient motivation and no interest in leaving traces. Sorrel had received one phone call from her father since that morning. It lasted 4 minutes. She did not tell Daniel everything that was said, and he did not ask. What she did tell him was this: that Gregor had used her real name, without the weight he usually gave it. Just her name, like it belonged to her. She had stood at the kitchen window for a long time after that call, watching the street below, and when she turned back into the room her eyes were dry, but her expression carried something new, not peace exactly. Something more honest than peace, the specific solemnity of a person who has stopped waiting for a wound to disappear and decided instead to simply carry it better. The mark on her neck remained. She had considered briefly having it removed, but she had decided against it, not for her father, not for the world he represented, but because erasure, she told Daniel one evening, was just another kind of running. And she was done running. The mark was hers now, not a brand, not a claim, but a record. Proof that she had come from somewhere difficult and chosen, every single day, to be someone different. Daniel had listened to this and said nothing for a moment. Then he had picked up his drafting pencil and turned back to the blueprint on his desk. "Some structures," he said quietly, "are stronger because of what they survived, not in spite of it." She had looked at him across the room, this man who counted seconds, who cooked badly, who read Dostoevsky just to argue with her, and something in her chest had shifted with the slow, tectonic certainty of a thing that has finally found its foundation. On a Tuesday morning in early spring, they sat at their usual table in the coffee shop on Mercer Street, window seat, her back to the wall, his drafting tablet open and ignored, 2 coffees, one barely touched. She was reading. He was watching the street, not for black cars anymore. Just watching. The way a person watches when the world has stopped being a threat and becomes simply a place they inhabit. She looked up from her book without being asked. "What are you thinking?" she said. He considered this genuinely. "I'm thinking," he said, "that 11 tables is the exact right number for this room, anymore and it loses something." She looked around the coffee shop with the careful, exit-locating eyes that would probably never fully leave her. Then she looked back at him. "I think you're right," she said. Stavros appeared, refilled their cups without being asked, and retreated without a word outside. The city moved through its morning, ordinary and unhurried and entirely indifferent to the fact that two people at a window table had, against considerable odds, found in each other the one thing that no empire can manufacture and no father can dissolve. A place that felt like staying. She reached across the table, covered his hand with hers. He turned his palm up and held it. And that was enough. That was everything. If this story moved you even a little, if Sorrel's courage or Daniel's quiet loyalty stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear that the life you build after everything tries to break you is still worth building. Subscribe for more stories like this one, because the best ones are always just beginning.